Oh, hi there. Welcome to my living room. I suppose I might need some introduction. I'm not quite as well known, for good reason, as the other Lickmeisters in the series that you have apparently been watching this Licksmas season. Max Allard and Ricky Myers and Cassidy Benches. They are really stars in their particular sphere of banjo greatness. I am a relative neophyte. I haven't been playing the banjo nearly as long as they have. I do have, I think, a fairly rich musical background. I've played the piano since I was 5 years old, so it's about 25, goodness gracious, almost 30 years by now. And I have a professional degree in piano performance. I've done quite a bit of composition, and I've done a lot of collaborative playing. But I haven't played the banjo for quite as long, and these weird instruments with frets and strings that you actually have to touch with your fingers instead of mediated through hammers and mechanical actions are a little bit less familiar. But I hope that as a result, the way I explain things might be of some use to those of you who are still at a beginner and intermediate level, because I recently have had to work through the same things, and I've had to think through them logically, and I've had to figure out how they actually work. A lot, I guess, like the way a foreign speaker of a language, that is someone who's had to learn a language as a non-native speaker, has to come to grips with the grammar of the language, and as a result is often better able to explain how the language works, why one uses one word instead of another, or why this verb takes this ending in this context instead of another. They are often much better at that, as I'm saying, than a native speaker who can speak the language maybe a little better, but really doesn't know what's going on. I'm not saying that Cassidy and Max and Ricky don't know what's going on with the banjo, but maybe I can offer a slightly different perspective on some things that might be useful to some people. Who knows? I don't want to flatter myself too much. But with that being said, let's get to the lick of the day. The lick of the day on this fourth day of Licksmas is the following. This is a lick that is played by J.D. Crowe in the backup to whatever verse comes directly after Tony Rice's guitar solo in Your Love Is Like a Flower, which is, by the way, if you want to listen to this, the first track on the second volume of the Bluegrass Album Band. Right, so the Bluegrass Album Band was a sort of a super group consisting of the lineup varied based on the album. But a number of well-known bluegrass greats during the 70s, 80s, and 90s. I'm not sure if they recorded after that. And they recorded mostly bluegrass standards. And they really recorded the definitive versions of a lot of these standards. And so if you want to listen to the track that this lick comes from, again, it's the first track on the second volume of the Bluegrass Album Band recordings. And the banjo player in question is J.D. Crowe, one of the greats of all time, an absolutely incredible player, so intuitive. He took the heritage that was developed for him largely through the brilliance of Earl Scruggs, and he both preserved it and cultivated it in really important ways for those of us who are interested in coming to terms with the banjo as it has, dare we say, traditionally been played. I mean, we have to remember that the way that the banjo is played in bluegrass has only been around for some 80 years. So if that to you is traditional, well, then it's a tradition that's worth cultivating, right? But it is a tradition that's new enough to be open to innovation. We have to keep that in mind too. But insofar as that tradition is something to be conserved, Earl Scruggs and J.D. Crowe are the two names to pay attention to, right? So here's the lick. Now, this is a backup lick. That's important to note, but it's a spicy backup lick. It's something you might even be able to get away with playing in a solo. And that's kind of what I like about it. The other thing I like about it is that as a lick, it's really easy to get into and it's really easy to get out of. Meaning that it starts in a really natural place. It starts on that open G string, 3rd string. That's where it starts, quarter note G. You got plenty of time to think about what's coming next, and also lots of licks end there, right? So you're likely to end up on this note at any given point in a solo or on a backup break. And so that's nice because it's easy to get into. And this is something we need to think about when we're playing licks. How do I get into the lick? This one you don't have to think about so much. Where does it end? It ends on a C. By the way, I should note before we go further, we're capoed up to B. So we're playing in B, and that's just because the Bluegrass Album Band plays Your Love is Like a Flower in B. So we're in B. And it doesn't really matter. You can play Your Love is Like a Flower in any key you want to. You could play it in B flat at the 3rd fret. You could play it in A at the 2nd fret. Heck, you could play it open just in standard G tuning for the banjo, although your fiddle players won't appreciate that very much. They're very persnickety about those top 2 strings of the fiddle, that A, E, 5th. They really like having access to that. But this song is, I think, fairly traditionally by now played in B. So just for the sake of getting used to playing in B, I'm capoed up to B in the hopes that you'll also capo up to B and maybe get used to playing in B. So, as I said, this lick starts on G relative. When I play that, it's really a B, but we're thinking of it as G. It's the 3rd string open, and it goes to a C. Here's the lick. It's a great lick, right? It sounds busy for backup, but J.D. Crowe offsets that by playing a pretty tame first half of the verse. So the backup is pretty tame, and in the second half of this particular verse, he lets loose a little bit. And so, in order to understand, and we're going to get into what's really going on there, what makes this lick work, and what drives this lick, and we're going to talk about appoggiaturas, and we're going to talk about chromatic walkdowns, and we're going to talk about the sort of compositional structure of this lick. But to really understand what's going on, I want to make sure that you all understand how to play backup down the neck on a banjo. Therefore, if you are a more advanced banjo player and you're really comfortable playing backup down the neck on a banjo, feel free to skip this section. But it's my impression that a lot of very skilled beginner and intermediate banjo players devote most of their time to learning solos, to learning tunes. And to an extent that makes sense, because that's a good way to develop vocabulary and it's a good way to develop technique. But if you want to play with other human beings, you're going to mostly be playing backup. So you got to know how to do it. But there's more. Backup is not boring. First of all, it's really satisfying to play it well. To know that you're the one that's creating the groove and the drive that the rest of the band is locking into. And as a banjo player, that is more or less your job. So it is intrinsically and artistically satisfying. That's number one. Number two, it is a fantastic sandbox for learning how to improvise. Because while what I'm about to teach you is algorithmic in nature, it is a way to almost automatically generate backup that is correct in the sense that it conforms to traditional principles and expectations for backup. However, on top of that, there is a lot of freedom for adding fills, for adding interesting licks, backup licks. So these licks can't be too interesting because we do not want to distract attention from whoever is soloing. Our job is to support them. Nonetheless, and in particular, if there are fewer players than normal, it is occasionally appropriate to throw in some interesting but not too interesting licks. And so backup is a safe space where most of what you are playing is conventional and automatically generated by the requirements of the chord that you're currently backing up, but where there is room occasionally to insert licks as appropriate. So this is an ideal scenario for beginner and intermediate players to begin experimenting with exercising control over the sounds that they're generating. We'll talk about how that happens in just a moment, all right? So first, let's make sure that we all know how to back up this tune. So there's no script for this, right? So I'm going to occasionally pause to think about what I'm going to say next. In this case, I'm going to pause to think about what is the chord progression to Your Love Is Like a Flower. So this chord progression is it's pretty easy to back up. So it's 2 bars of G. We'll play 2 quarter notes per bar, as if we're in 2/4 duple meter. So G, 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 2 bars of C, C, 2 bars of G, 2 bars of D, 2 bars of G, 2 bars of C, 1 bar of G, 1 bar of D, 1 bar of G. All right? So I'll play for you a very simple backup break. It's simple, but I don't want you to labor under the misapprehension that it's simplistic. So this is a backup break as my teacher, Kristen Scott Benson, would play it. Maybe the first time through. This is something that a real banjo player might actually play on a real break, in a real tune, in a real performance setting. It's very simple. But when we're backing up a band, most of what we're going to do is going to be simple. And furthermore, in particular, the first time that you're playing the backup, you need to be as simple as possible, because you have to leave room to grow, right? So there should be some overarching structure of the piece that builds to a climax or a peroration, right? And then comes to a gentler conclusion. And one way that we can help the band do that as banjo players, is to make sure that our first backup break is as simple as possible. Now I challenge you to listen to the backup to Your Love Is Like a Flower. That is J.D. Crow's backup to this particular track. And mark what he does the first time he plays backup. Actually do that. Pause this video. Go and watch that track. Find it. Search for it on YouTube and listen to it. Have you done that? If you've done that, you'll have noticed that this is a trick question, because if I recall correctly, and it could be wrong, JD plays nothing for the first verse, right? He's just stated the melody of the tune. So he got the first break, right? He stated the melody very, very conventionally. He plays something like, and I'm going to mess this up. Lots of mistakes there, but my fingers are cold and I haven't touched the banjo all day because I have children. So he plays something like that, and then the first break, right? He doesn't play anything. He lets the ear rest, right? There's an empty texture. Nothing happens for a whole verse. So this is just in support of my point that we need to get used to simple, and occasionally we need to get used to silence as banjo players, all right? And, maybe I might do something. Something like that. Maybe we're we're just marking the chords, right, with these pinches. Or maybe like JD, we just hang back entirely on the first verse. Now, here's a very simple way to back up this tune. I'm going to teach you how this unfolds, almost, as I said, algorithmically, right? That is according to a formula. So you can take this formula with you and you can apply it to any other tune with any other chord progression, and you can generate backup, which means if you're in a jam setting and you understand the principles of what we're about to do, you'll always be okay, at least with down the neck backup, which is considerably simpler, I think, than up the neck backup. And so here's an example of what that might look like, right? So again, G, G, C, C, G, G, D, D, G, G, C, C, G, D, G. All right, so this is what that might sound like. I'll play it slowly first. So slowly first, fast second. Typically going to end almost without exception, even once we add in fills and more interesting structure, we're almost always going to end with that G lick. So you should know that, and I'm not going to teach it in this video. It's often referred to as the G lick, right? You need to know how to do that. Okay, so here that is faster. So in a second, I'll explain how that works. That's fine. You can get away with that. You can play that stage at the Grand Ole Opry for at least one verse. You don't want to do that every time. People start to suspect you don't know what you're doing. But at least one verse, you get away with that. And at a local jam session, that'll be gold, right? Because it establishes the chords. It's just interesting enough to occasionally tune into, but it doesn't distract from what the rest of the band is doing. And for you as a banjo player, you can easily generate it through the principles that I'm about to explain. After we explain that, we'll talk about how to build up to... Right? That is just a slight deviation from the first thing that I played. All right, so this is written out in your tab. So the first bit of the tab explains or shows a complete break using this algorithmic system. So let me explain how it works. For each chord, the first thing you do is state the root note of the chord. That gets a quarter note, right? So 1, right? You get one beat for that. So the first chord of this piece is G, so you play a G. The next thing that happens is a forward roll. So 1 and 2 and 1 and. All right? So that's the second half of the first bar and the first half of the second bar in the case of 2 bars of a particular chord. So 1 and 2 and 1 and is what you would play. And that's a forward roll that starts on that open 5th string and just powers through strings 5, 3, and 1. Now what do you need to do? Now you need to prepare the ear to hear the next chord. So there's going to be a transition. And typically this involves a reversal of the roll. So we go from a forward roll to a backwards roll, all right? So we go root, state the root, G, forward roll, backwards roll, and then the root of the next chord, which in this case is C. So that sounds like... And you'll notice when I'm playing that, I'm mostly being quite soft, but I'm emphasizing the important things. So the important things are the root of the chord, not the forward roll that follows, a couple of notes from the transition backwards roll and the root of the next chord. And in particular, when we're going to C, you'll notice we play strings 1, 2, 3, 1. The important things to emphasize are the second string and the third string, and not the first string. So that might sound like, so 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and those two strings. Why? Because that sets up the ear to hear the C. So that sounds together, you'll be convinced if you hear it in context. Right? So you're preparing the ear to hear the next chord, all right? And you can go through the rest of the tab in this fashion. You'll notice each one of those bars, whether it's a G or a C or a D, has a particular note. For the C chord, it's the first fret, second string, right? That is the root of the chord. For the D chord, fourth string open, you state the root, and then there is some forward roll, and then a reversal. So what you need to do, and this is homework, I'm not going to belabor this in this video, is to learn for each of those chords what the root is, what the particular forward roll is that's associated with that chord, and what the turnaround is, the reversal, the backwards roll, right? So there's and in particular, the tricky bit here, I'm going to try to give you enough to go on, but not spend enough time to make this a 2-hour video, because it easily could be a 2-hour video. With the transition rolls, you need to mark, you need to associate in your brain the transition roll in particular with the chord you're coming from and the chord you're going to. So for instance, if you're going from G to C, the transition roll is right, followed by. If you're going from C to G, the transition roll is. If you're going from G to D, the transition is. You'll notice it's the same as from C to G. That's true. I'll show you. So here's G to C. And if you're going from G to D, it works, right? So this is pretty conventional. This is just conventional, traditional vocabulary that you need to know, on which, importantly, we can build more interesting things. So this requires some practice. And the way to practice this is to pick a tune that's not Your Love Is Like a Flower, to look at how we tabbed out Your Love Is Like a Flower, and to map the chords in Your Love Is Like a Flower, or rather the patterns being played over the G, C, and D chords in Your Love Is Like a Flower to the chords in whatever tune you've picked out. I'll give you one. Try Blue Ridge Cabin Home. That's a great one to try to apply this to. It's a straightforward permutation of the chords in Your Love Is Like a Flower, and it's actually simpler than Your Love Is Like a Flower. So that's really something to try your hand at. And if you struggle, leave a comment in the YouTube video, and we'll reach out and try to help, right? Okay, so now the rest of this tab talks about decorations that you can apply to each of the chords. And these decorations are very conventional, to the extent that many of these will actually be your go-to for a standard backup verse, rather than what I just played. What I just played is fine, and I want to emphasize you need to be able to play it. Skilled players, award-winning, IBMA award-winning players recognize what was just played as a standard backup break. So this is sort of the standard ground floor level of backup, but we also need to understand what I'm about to show. And so where we just played for our G chord, G open third string, forward roll on strings 5, 3, 1. What we're typically gonna do for a G chord is actually G open third string, slide on the fourth string from the second to the fifth fret, So the only place this differs is where the forward roll starts. Instead of starting the forward roll on the 5th string, we're going to start the forward roll on the 4th string. Literally every other note remains the same. But this is without a doubt, of the decorations shown in this tab, the most conventional and probably the one that you're going to want to use most of the time. You want to be able to do, but you want to train your ear most of the time to prefer. And you'll immediately recognize this is a very Scruggsy sound, right? So let's hear that. Right? Okay. The second decoration is going to be in the transition from G to C. So as we go from G to C, instead of simply playing this little reversal and then the C note, we're often going to prepare it just a little bit to draw the ear towards that C even more, right? So instead of what we just did, we'll often do note, root, slide. So that's the end of the first bar. We're immediately going to do, and you have that written out, so I won't explain each of those, each of those notes and frets at the, currently. You can look at the tab, but I will tell you what to emphasize. What you really want to emphasize is that particular slide, and there's a little bit of a bend in there. Always, when we slide from 2 to 3, we're almost always bending just a little bit, so that that 3rd fret is almost a B natural, but not quite. Here's the B flat and a B natural. We're probably bending about halfway between a B natural and a B flat. Okay, so that's important. As you slide, you bend. So the other thing you want to emphasize is the B and the G. So the G into the C. So listen to that. Okay, so that's going to be our standard G to C transition. Once in C, most of the time, we'll play just what we did in our basic backup. But you'll notice, if you listen closely in Your Love is Like a Flower, J.D. Crowe most often decorates it slightly. So we get 2 bars of C. The first bar, he'll often do. He'll play this, I just played it 3 times. He'll play this like 1 time on the first bar of C. Right? So that's pretty common, and you could double it. You could occupy the whole 2 bars of C with that if you wanted to. I don't think he ever does that on this track. Not to say that he never does it, but he doesn't on this particular track, but you could. One thing that he often does is he actually, after he plays that 1 bar, is he uses his pinky to fret the B flat. And he plays a forward roll, actually a forward backward roll. And then our standard reversal or transition back to the G. So that together would sound like. All right, so the next thing that we need to know is how to get from G down to D. There's many, many, many ways to do this. Many of them involve chromatic walkdowns. The one that J.D. Crowe seems to prefer, again, on this track, it almost seems, in each track he has something that's kind of on his mind, a particular set of licks that are on his mind. that he tends to hear statistically more than others, and then play as a result. And so on this particular track, what he'll often do from G to D is he'll play G, and then for his reversal, he'll do. So instead of, that's the reversal we had written in the basic tab, he'll slide from the 2nd fret to the 3rd fret. That's one thing you could do. Another thing you could do, which is very J.D. Crowian, is to do a pull-off from the 3rd to 2nd fret. So listen to that. That's messy. So there's another thing you could do. Now, you'll just notice that I played an interesting thing over D. So what we taught, and importantly, what JD does most of the time at the end of the break, right, for the final D chord of the break, is something like. But for the first D of each break, almost universally, he does, and you have this written out as a decoration of D. It was a sneeze. It's not part of the lick. Don't do that. I mean, unless you have to. And it's important to note that he plays with this particular lick with a certain pizzazz that I think is worth imitating. And it really makes the lick work. It makes it interesting. It's otherwise quite simple. But I think that traditional bluegrass is all about simple material played with so much attitude that it's really exciting to listen to. And that often involves the rhythmic elements and emphasizing certain syncopations. So here there's syncopations galore because the forward roll. Keep in mind, a forward roll involves 3 fingers, right? But we're mostly playing in duple meters where things are subdivided into 2s. So if you play patterns involving 3 fingers over patterns that involve 2 beats, per subdivision, then you're going to naturally get syncopations. So this is what Earl Scruggs meant when he said that what he thought he had brought to the banjo was syncopation. And he meant this 3-finger style, and he championed, naturally led to syncopations. So anyway, the way this lick works is that JD emphasizes to a strong degree the index finger. So that one, and then he emphasizes, so 2 index finger emphases. Hear that? I'm exaggerating. I'll exaggerate even more. So emphasize the index finger for the first 2 times it occurs, and then exaggerate the middle finger on that descending, that backward roll. So it sounds like. So listen to that in context. That's very J.D. Crowian to play it like that way. All right. So before we get to the lick, let's finish up here. Do we have anything else we need to talk about here? There's other variations, and they're I'm sort of looking down at the tab. They're in the tab that I provided you with, but I'm going to leave you to explore those on your own, because I have limited time here with you tonight, unfortunately. Right? There's more of these videos to record. There's commentary to record. There's children to attend to. It's Christmas time, so I'll leave you with some homework in exploring the other variations that I've written out, and trying to insert those back in freely. In other words, at your choice, at your discretion, to the basic backup pattern. So what I want you to do is to practice to acquire for yourself that basic backup pattern, to be able to play that over any sequence of chords that is presented to you. And then I want you to practice freely and randomly substituting in the decorations over the appropriate chords. All right? So that's your homework. Now, Finally, we've made it to the J.D. Crowe lick. This is what we're going to end with. We don't have too much time left here. So the lick now can stand in context. Here it is in context. So we'll play a backup break leading to the lick, right? With the decorations that we just learned. Let's decorate it even more. Okay, so you'll notice the first half of the break was stuff we've already talked about. Then we arrive back at G for the second time. So we do G, G, C, C, G, G, D, D. That's the first half. And we get back to G, which is, there's our G. So we've stated the chord. Normally, we would continue by what? A forward roll, or a forward roll, right? But here, for the only time in this particular track, JD decorates the second half of the backup. It's not quite how he played it. An artifact of playing it slowly, perhaps. What's going on here? This is very interesting. I don't know if it sounds interesting or striking at speed in the context of it. It did to me. It stood out to my ear. But it's worth talking about this because there's some interesting musical devices happening. So let's play this slowly, and I want you to pause the video and sing where your ear is leading you, okay? So we state the G of our backup pattern, right? So here's the root. Then we play the weird J.D. Crowe, beginning of the weird J.D. Crowe lick. So let's sing that, right? So, where's it going? It's going here, right? So what is happening? That's G, F sharp, F, E. Or if you want to do it in solfege, do is the root of the whole, you know, it's the tonic chord. That's the home chord. So do, ti, te, la. If you prefer solfege, maybe some of you have a choral background or a music ed background, and that's useful to you. So the ear is led to la, right? And it's led to the 6th scale degree. It's led to the 3rd of that C chord. It's led to the 3rd. But JD doesn't do that. He slightly defies or confounds our expectations by playing, and I'll stop on the downbeat of the next bar. That's a little bit strange, right? Because what chord was coming up? C. But instead we have... Right? So I'll play that with the chord. Odd. A little bit odd, right? What's going on? Well, this makes sense in context because what happens immediately after is we do get the C, right? We do get the C. But we get it not on the downbeat. On the downbeat, we get a non-chord tone, a D. There's no D. There's no D in a C chord. That's not in the chord. So, when we have a non-chord tone on the downbeat resolving to a chord tone, this is called in music an appoggiatura. If you want to say it fancy in Italian, appoggiatura. Appoggiare, Spanish appoggiar, means to lean on something. So an appoggiatura is a leaning on something. Is if you're kind of leaning on something and then falling back. You're leaning on that, you know. Leaning on that and then falling back. But on the offbeat to the chord, to the main chord, this is an appoggiatura. And before Italian became the lingua franca of music and permeated the English-speaking musical world, we used to have English terms for all of these concepts, pure English terms, and we used to call this a backfall. We used to call it a backfall. And they still call it a Nachschlag or Vorschlag, Nachschlag, I think, in German. I could be wrong on that. So maybe, if you want to in the comments, German-speaking musicians or German musicians, even better, correct me. But we used to call this a backfall because we're falling back to the main note. Okay? And lest you think this is a little bit unusual, it's very common in folk music, in particular in country music. And I haven't practiced this, and I just sort of thought of this on the spot, but let's try to see if we can imagine a version of the second half of this solo, this backup, that uses as many appoggiatures as we can. So that was all appoggiaturas, a little bit strange at this slow tempo. Let's see if we can do it faster. Very strange. But what we're doing is for every single one of those chords, we're playing a non-chord tone directly above the chord tone that we're targeting on the downbeat. And then on the offbeat, we're resolving to the chord tone. So these are appoggiaturas. And they do occur quite a bit in country music. Maybe listen out for them, these backfalls, if you will. I think we should, let's adopt that. Let's let that be our term in bluegrass, so we don't sound too pretentious. We're not gonna say appoggiatura. Let's say backfall. Oh, that's a neat backfall you did in that solo. That's my proposal to the bluegrass community here today. In any case, there are a number of variations of this that we show, that we propose, that I've written out in the tab. And I want to thank Cassidy Banges for writing this tab out for me, because I do not currently have a computer that I can write tab on. And so Cassidy has worked with me, your other Lickmeister, Cassidy Banges, has worked with me and used Sibelius to write these out. It's been a great help. I was a Sibelius user back in the 2000 aughts and teens, back when I had a computer that I could install Sibelius on. And at the time, I never dreamed of writing banjo tab in Sibelius, but Cassidy does use Sibelius for banjo tab, and it works quite well. And so we have these lovely banjo tabs. We should thank Cassidy for them being written out for you on a computer and not handwritten by me on manuscript paper. So this has been a great blessing. In any case, study these because they show a lot of interesting variations. And so these involve, for instance, what if we targeted arriving on that C on the downbeat? So let's try that one. Something like that, right? Sorry. A lot of different variations of this that naturally land on the C, which is nice because a lot of our vocabulary of C licks that we might be familiar with start on C, naturally enough, right? That first fret of that second string. So it's useful to have access to slight variations of this particular crow lick that end on the C on the downbeat. But the nice thing about this lick is if you do use it as J.D. Crowe used it, all you have to do to continue this is to play the forward roll in C as we've written it out in the banjo tab, for the conventional simple basic backup, and you will be okay, even though we're a beat delayed. So let's try that. Sorry about that mistake. With more confidence this time that it will actually work, because it did. Right? So we just played. In other words, we picked up exactly as we might have been already playing in the basic simple backup tab, just at the appropriate beat, right? So beats 1 and, so we played 1 and from the crow lick, and then we just continued as if we'd not even played the crow lick. And it works out. So that's important to note. If you can't think of anything to do after this, maybe you get lost, you can just continue as normal. But the way crow continues is, as he does this. And that's nice. I mean, there's a million ways you can continue. So you can syncopate it. Sorry. So you can syncopate it a little bit. You can do, what could you do? I guess you continue normal. And follow with other licks. What else could you do? There's a lot of, and none of them are coming to me right now. There's a lot of things you can do once you get to that C. But I think that there is something magical about what crow actually does following this particular lick. And it's worth learning them together as a set. Although I'd encourage you to watch the commentary video that we post on this, where we'll invariably come up with other alternatives to both halves. The G lick going to C, that is, and then the C lick going to G. So there will be alternatives, but I encourage you to set this for yourself as a composition assignment. All right. In other words, the composition assignment would be, all right, I've got to make it from G to C. What can I do in the meantime? I don't know, something like, that was not good, but it shows that you can on the spot just sort of put together the stock things that forward rolls, pinches, and just try to force your fingers to go from G down to C, something like that, or lots of ways to do this, something maybe bluesy if you want, right? Lots of things that you could do, but try to work through that and try to come up with your own variations, and you don't have to love them. That's the thing about composition. The doing is the learning. You don't have to love what you produce. You just have to try to produce it, because the act of producing does something to your brain, right? It reconfigures it. It makes it open to new possibilities, and it begins to exercise muscles that for most of us are never exercised. And so there's a little bit of a sense of teetering on the edge of a void at the beginning, and you have to accept that feeling and just try, right? You just have to try. And you have to think of part of your job as a banjo player is to sit at home and to compose a little bit. Maybe only 1 in 50 attempts actually yield something that you'd want to you think, oh, oh man, I hope I was recording. Let me write down what I did. And I want to learn that and add that to my vocabulary. But that's okay. Even if that never happens, it's still developing muscles, right? Okay. So this is all we have time for today, unfortunately. I had more I wanted to talk to you, but we've run out of time. So you'll see me again in 4 days when we will be talking about another lick in double C tuning. So if you like Jens Kruger, if you like traditional claw hammer, if you like traditional folk hymnody, if you like C minor, you've always wanted to know how to play in C minor on a banjo, stay tuned, pay attention, and watch that particular video, and we'll have a lot of fun together. Anyway, it's been great talking to you. I hope that you've gotten something out of this. Please, please, please practice backup. Make it your goal to become a complete banjo player. Not just someone who can play the heads of tunes, but someone that can walk into a jam session and spend the whole time playing backup, simple backup, be humble about it, and enjoy it, and provide a good experience for the other people at the jam, making them feel secure that there is good rhythm and correct conventional sounding chords behind them, supporting them. So that's my challenge to you, is to get good at that, all right? And if you have questions, if you want to know more, if you want to delve deeper into backup, if you want to talk up the neck backup, how do you, how do you do that kind of stuff, right? That very J.D. Crowian, kind of up the neck stuff. How do you do that? If you're interested, leave a comment in the YouTube video, and I'll make more videos for you. Merry Licksmas.